Hello and welcome to 4-4. Today we get to start doing some complex numbers. Complex numbers is going to be a combination of real numbers and imaginary numbers. So far, every single number we've ever messed with was a real number. If you remember when we kind of categorized real numbers, integers, whole numbers, rationals, irrational, all of them were real. Today we get to talk about imaginary numbers. And imaginary numbers happen when you try taking the square root of a negative number. So when I'm going to kind of simplify that all the way down. The square root of -1 is going to be kind of written with this I. So anywhere you see I, that's going to mean the square root of -1. So let's hop down and start with some examples. You're going to be asked to simplify some square roots of negative numbers. The number is simplified when the number underneath the radical sign or the square root, it has been factored with all the square numbers taken out. And then also we're going to take out that negative by using an I. So let's just do an example. 18. Here's what you're going to do. Take 18 and ask yourself what square numbers can be divided out. So square numbers would be like 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, right? This is 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared, 5 squared, and 6 squared. And when I look at 18, I see a 2 times 9 is what gives me 18. When you have a radical, you can kind of, quote, distribute. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show that I have a square root of -1, a square root of 2, and a square root of 9. If I take -1 times 2 times 9, that's -2. -2 times 9 is a -18. Okay, so I've just divided out the three numbers that get me to 18, including the negative number. So then what I'm going to do is just simplify. The square root of -1, I want you to write as I. Now the square root of 2, here's the key, no decimals. So the square root of 2, if you can't get a nice happy square root of that, just leave it as the square root of 2. But the difference is this 9, square root of 9 is a nice happy 3. Square root of 9 is 3, so it's not the square root of 3, it's just 3 because the square root of 9 is 3. Now since it's -1 times 2 times 9, it's still going to be the square root of -1 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 9, which means you still have I times the square root of 2 times 3. So to write this as a nice, happy final answer, it's going to be 3I times the square root of 2. Just like that. So if I look at 1b, that's going to be -1. Just pull that -1 out from the beginning. How about a 25? And then 25, that's going to be 25 times 5 to get that 125. I just knew that 25 happens to go into 125 nice and evenly. So the square root of -1, the square root of 25, and the square root of 5. The square root of -1 is I. The square root of 25 is 5. And the square root of 5 is an ugly decimal, so I'm just going to leave it as the square root of 5, making my final answer 5I square root 5. Do you notice that both times I write I after the coefficient, the nice happy, 3, 5 whole number there? So when I simplify this, I want you to treat I like a variable. So when I do that, that means I can just take the 3 times the 4 and I times I, which if you had x times x, you would say, oh, that's x squared. Well, I times I is I squared. But let's stop for a second and ask ourselves, what does I equal? I is the square root of negative 1. And in this case, it's being squared, thanks to that little guy right here, right? Now, hold on. If you are squaring a square root, those simplify, right? Cancels out. So now you just have 12 times negative 1, which is just negative 12. My pen is going crazy today. There we go. Let's try another one. Sometimes they are not already going to have the radical simplified where it has the I. So what I'm going to do is separate this one out with a negative 1, a 4, and a 5, because 4 times 5 is 20. So that's going to give me I times 2 times the square root of 5. Come on, buddy. Now this is going to be my negative 1, 4, and 3, which would be I times 2 times the square root of 3. So I have 2I times the square root of 5 times 2I square root 3. So far, so good. So what I want you to do now is multiply the things that are similar. So I'm going to take the 2's times each other, the i's times each other, and then the stuff that's underneath the radical signs together. So 2 times 2 is 4. I times I is I squared. Oh, except I already identified that I squared is just 1. And, I'm sorry, then 3 times 5 is 15. So double check. 15, is that going to have any squares that I need to take out? And it doesn't look like it. So I'm just going to do square root 15. So my answer, oops, that was supposed to be a negative 1, wasn't it? My answer is negative 4 times the square root of 15. You don't actually need parentheses. There. That's really how you can write that. All right, I'm going to pause the video here and continue from there.